Thank you. And yes, I felt a few of those things. So, well, yeah, I'm Ana Cecilia Calle and I come from Bogota, and I've been making books since I was 18 years old. I grew up reading independent publishers. For those Colombians there, I will say a few names I'm sure you will feel as well. Editorial Norma, for instance, in their children's essay, novel, and poetry collections. And as a literature student, I used to roam downtown bookstores in Bogota, where I grew up, looking for old indie presses such as Tercer Mundo, Arango Editores, or Valencia Editores. For me, what Tercer Mundo, Arango, or Valencia used to publish, mainly Colombian fiction and poetry, essays, and books about our histories and conflicts, was incredibly good, but incredibly old-fashioned, especially their book covers. We're talking about books published in the 70s, so in the early 2000s, that was old for me. It's like, oh, it looks old. I wanted something else, but yet I could recognize that what they published was essential and rare. By the early 2010s, all of them had gone out of business. By the 2010s as well, I remember an independent publishing boom, a type of indie publishing that I would call heavily graphic or designer artist driven, mainly centered in Bogota and Medellin, and around fanzines, posters, and illustrated books. Graphic designers and visual artists owned some of these presses. For what I saw then, I brought a few names: Tragaluz, La Silueta, or Laguna, were innovative, adding something we, as young consumers, thought was missing in the field: color and visual curiosity. Some of these presses also published young authors, but not enough. Not enough. I thought they were missing younger voices, especially those coming from the very first cohorts of the newly launched creative writing MFA in the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, where I was studying at the time. This MFA was followed by an undergraduate degree in creative writing, an MFA in the private Universidad Central, and the creative writing MFA in the Instituto Caro y Cuervo, a public institution in Bogota. Feeling there should be more space for those creators, we launched our press, Himpar Editores, right there in your screen. This is us. In 2014, there was a perceived need for space for new fiction in the country. I'm not a fiction writer, but two of my business partners were about to release their first books. I later understood this perceived need for space is typical of almost every business decision, and especially prevalent in South America regarding independent publishing, which is the field I know. This hunch, this need for space, has also shaped the literary field in Colombia and in many other places in the world, right? But allow me to talk about Himpar's trajectory, which I divided into 3 parts and spiced with a few reflections. Funding. Almost all independent presses share struggles. Like others, Himpar had no capital to start its catalog and depended for years on grants from Bogotá's Center for the Arts, Instituto Distrital de las Artes. IDARTES has had a grant portfolio for the arts since 2011, which included supporting emerging publications like ours. On a side note, IDARTES also created a grant specifically to support research on publishing since 2014. Like Himpar, many other independent publishers have benefited from this initiative, and the Ministry of Culture has granted small incentives for independent publishers since the 2010s. See this boom in the 2010s? It matches, sort of. These factors allow me to suppose that public support has helped many of us put into the public realm objects that otherwise would have stayed as projects for years. This support also points to a commonality with the history of publishing in Colombia. Whenever there is a favorable political climate towards culture and the book, small presses and bookstores tend to bloom. And sadly, whenever political and economic factors stress the environment and there is a loss of governmental support, most of these initiatives tend to go out of business. 2, professionalization. 2/3 of Himpar left Colombia to pursue doctoral studies in the US. One member stayed in the field until he also came to the US. Even though we are one of the few publishers in Colombia with a team composed of PhDs and MFAs, I think we signal a change towards specialization and professionalization in publishers from the urban middle class. I hope to refer to this later. However, professionalization has also meant more things to us than academia. The pandemic forced us to change our distribution strategies and move to a distribution partner with a very rudimentary e-commerce system. We also had to understand the idea of building digital communities and even take a digital marketing class offered for free by the District of Bogota. This means that 4 or 5 years ago, we started thinking about sustainability rather than only focusing on catalog building or the editing portion of the business. And like many other independent publishers, and thinking about South America and East Africa, or we can talk about the Anglo-American world as well, distribution, marketing, and sales are part of something we feel underprepared for and logistically challenged by. With time, Himpar showed 3 main characteristics. The Colombian academic Sergio Pérez Alvarez typologized about the modern editor. 1, interest in the book market. 2, development of publishing strategies. And 3, catalog building. In his book, Publishing Culture in Colombia in the 20th Century, he traces the confirmation of the modern publisher and highlights independent publishers like Editorial Bedú from Medellin as pioneers of strategies to build popularity among the public. But I'm getting ahead of the next point, which is called further reading. Reading about how the field took shape in Colombia, I found none of my problems were unique. And publishers like Arturo Zapata from Editorial Zapata had similar struggles in the 1950s. Among other things, Zapata was the first publisher in Colombia to use the railway system to try and solve the issue of distributing books in the complex geography of the tropics. I have more information about publishing because, along with the indie boom and the creative writing MFA boom of the 2010s in Colombia, we now have our first MA in Publishing Studies, launched in 2016 by the Instituto Guerrero. There is one major in publishing in Colombia, the Campo Editorial y Multimedial at the Universidad Javeriana, which I coordinate at the moment, and which is 20 years old, right? There is a minor in publishing at the Universidad de Antioquia in Medellin, and a minor at the Universidad Jorge Tadeo Lozano in Bogota, both less than 10 years old, right? However, the circulation of specific studies about book culture in the country is more accessible due to the research outcomes from the MA in Publishing Studies at the Instituto Guerrero. Authors like Margarita Valencia, Paula Andrea Marin, Juan David Murillo, and Sergio Pérez Alvarez and Diana Paula Guzman have done a laudable job of mapping the 19th century publishing pioneers or sharing articles and books on the connections between, these are classical connections, newspapers, bookstores, as catalysts for creating new presses. There are several examples of these connections from different sides of the political spectrum. And to finish, I would like to point out the existence of a relatively new collection about book cultures, which is called Biblioteca Latinoamericana de Culturas del Libro. It's edited between 2 universities in Colombia and 1 university in Mexico. So there is also scholarly collaboration in this. To finish, I would like to point out that professionalization and specialization are continuous and singular changes in the field, especially regarding access to information and research about the history of publishing in the country. professionalization is a very complex word, though, and I doubt about it when I use it. Many of our countries, from Argentina to Mexico, concentrate their publishing activity in 2 or 3 cities, right? There's still a lot of work to do. However, the availability of specific studies about independent publishing is new and has been funded by the government. There are also very interesting studies about ediciones cartoneras, book promotion in smaller cities, community publishing, writers associations in the Black Pacific, for instance, public policy and culture circulation, done inside and outside academia as part of consulting services. So Colombia is wondering and trying to figure out the role of publishing and independent publishing as a catalyzer of culture in the country. Last but not least, there has been an interesting debate about what we consider independent in publishing and what Colombian publishing means. Is a book by John Grisham, edited in Spain and printed in Colombia, a book that is subject to governmental tax cuts? I'm not sure about that, so let me know what you think. Thank you very much.